Hi everyone, I'm Octavia and I'm going to Hello everyone, I'm Octavia and I am the CEO of EcoTrax company. Today in this presentation, I will discuss my individual contribution to the ISMS implementation of EcoTrax company. My first step as the CEO was to research on the laws and regulations and standards related to my CEO role and also to the company. This research helped me define my ISMS scope, and also by understanding this, I will ensure my ISMS was both compliant and strategically aligned with the EcoTrax business objective. I would like to show you on the files on my work on the first 5 weeks, where I created the business process and also information asset for my CEO role. And then I created the WWMD on what will the management do, including the risk rating response and also review frequency. I created a quantitative consequences table and ISMS scope, and also the possible risk for my CEO roles, and also risk scenario, and also risk appetite, and a draft on quantitative risk assessment. This is all the draft from the first 5 weeks, where for the risk scenario itself, this is like the very first draft. Then I have several updates on my risk scenarios, and we decided on implementing fair models, where I'm going to discuss more on that later on. And from week 5 onwards, our group decided to do everything as a group and have a group-based documentation where we implement SOA as our checklist and also our guidelines to ensure that we have all of the mandatory ISMS document for our company. And then our group defined the ISMS scope statement, where I also have my own version of ISMS scope, but after discussions and collaborations, we combine all of the ISMS scope into one, and this is how our scope statement looks like. And then because there is a lot of overlap on our business process and also information asset, we need to review everything and ensure there's no business process and information assets that overlap with other C-level roles. That is why I have changed my business process and information asset again. And this is the finalized business process and information asset for my CEO role. And then after that, we created the WWMD table as a group, where it shows the response and also the review frequency on what will the management do based on the risk rating levels. And then after that, we created the consequences table, a quantitative one based on the finance strategy, operation technology, and also information aspect. And then we created a consequences table threshold, where this will be implemented in our fair model later on. And then our company decided to treat the risk above our risk appetite, which is moderate, and also for the one below our risk appetite will be accepted and monitored. And then finally, this is a combined risk scenarios. Well, I've done my CEO part, where this is combined with all of the other group members. And then this also includes the more descriptive risk scenarios, including the vulnerability, threat, and also each information asset have the assessed value and also the reasoning as well. And it also includes the who, what, where, how, when, why, and also the controls. And we decided to implement a fair model quantitative calculation for our risk scenarios, because we want to compare our final calculations on the cost of loss with our threshold, and so we can see which one is above our risk appetite. And as you can see here, this is how we decided on which risk we will treat and which risk we will accept and monitor. And then after we know of the risk that we would like to treat, we created the risk treatment plan. In this case, I created my own CEO treatment plan based on my own scenarios that above the risk appetite level. And then after that, I created my CEO information classification to identify and rank EcoTrax critical assets. So I assess each asset based on the confidentiality, integrity, availability, and also the business value. And then I created my CEO BIA based on my CEO scenario as well, where in this BIA or business impact analysis, it is used to determine which business function were most critical to our company and how downtime will affect our operations. And then after that, I created my CO BCP and also DRP, where the BCP is used to maintain the operation through alternative procedures. And for the DRP for my CEO as well, I created the DRP to outline the step for restoring IT system and data integrity. And then from that BCP and BIA, I created the TRA, threat and risk assessment, by mapping the threat vulnerabilities and also the impact, where in this case, the controls is connected to the SOA controls. As you can see on my SOA controls, I have linked my CEO scenarios on the TRA to the SOA controls. So aside from that, I would say as a CEO, I am responsible for preparing and also reviewing all of the mandatory ISMS documents. As you can see, each of the files here have all of the mandatory documents that our company need to have, and I'm responsible on creating it, reviewing it, and also approving it. And I want to ensure that everything that we have done for the ISMS implementation in our company have a document for reasoning or justification. That is why in the submission itself, as you can see, we all have the reasoning on everything we do for the ISMS implementation for EcoTrax company. I think that's all for my presentation. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Naftali. I'm the Chief Operation Officer of EcoTrax, and today I'll walk you through the key security management activities I developed and contributed to as part of our company's ISMS initiative. This includes our compliance alignment, business process mapping, risk and continuity planning, and the enhancement of our fair risk model. First, I started by identifying all laws and regulations relevant to EcoTrax and my COO role, and the consequence matrix table updated with percentage-based impact levels. Then I mapped the business process and linked each one to 3 distinct information assets. I made sure that different information asset comes from different sectors. After the processes and assets were defined, I built CO-specific security tools, such as the WWMD decision framework. Once each department had completed their part, all company roles started to work as a group. Then each information asset generated 3 risk scenarios describing how, where, what, and who elements, plus vulnerabilities, threats, impacts, frequencies, and loss costs. And we held several group discussions to refine and merge our work. All of the results from here on have been discussed and agreed upon as a group. I also updated my business process. For example, financial and contract oversight was revised into procurement contract oversight, while sustainability and technology operations were assigned to other roles. We also combined our WWMD, so each roles have the same review frequency and risk rating. We also agreed upon a risk appetite, which we will accept minor and moderate risks and treat major, severe, and catastrophic risks. Finally, we created a shared statement of applicability to document and track our implemented controls. For the risk scenarios, after further group discussions, we decided to make them more detailed by integrating fair model columns. Initially, all of these were filled qualitatively using descriptive terms or estimated percentages. However, after several meetings with Milton and additional research, I realized that this qualitative version couldn't justify how we reached the final fair result, particularly the risk ALE, annualized loss expectancy. For example, on the fair model table, it shows that the threat event frequency is the combination of contact frequency and probability of action. We can't explain our result, which are assumptions, with this version, because as Milton said, again, it doesn't make sense to multiply CAD by B. So we began research on how to make our fair model from qualitative analysis to quantitative. So for instance, instead of just wordings and random percentages to the probability of action, we calculated it as threat received per year divided by threat processed per year. For threat capability and resistance strength, it was supposed to be each scenario have different analysis to find the result. But due to the limited amount of time, I designed a universal formula that incorporated variables such as time requirement, resource availability, technology sophistication, actor skill, and access level that can be applied across all risk cases. After applying these formulas, I revised my individual COO risk scenarios, and now each one produces quantifiable data-driven results where the risk LE is calculated directly from fair metrics. Once fair results were finalized, we used our risk appetite to identify which scenarios required mitigation. Keeping all risks above moderate level, I then created a risk treatment plan for the COO scope, aligning controls with the SOA. Now for the threat and risk assessment, I converted the scenarios into a story-based format and added columns for risk statement, vulnerabilities, and threats. I then developed the threat and risk assessment table for my COO section, where we focused on risk above the company's appetite and compared how the consequences differ between scenarios with SOA controls and those without. Then the business impact analysis, assessing cost, time, and reputational effect for 1 hour, 1 day, and 1 week disruptions. I also integrated RTO, recovery time objective, and RPO, recovery point objective. The BCP uses the RTO and RPO from the BIA as benchmarks. They set the time and data limits the company must meet during a disruption, so the plan focuses on keeping operations running within those thresholds. Then I also created DRP for my section role COO. Throughout this project, we maintained strong collaboration across all roles. We consolidated every component from regulatory mapping and WWMD tables to to reasoning, document, and evidence into one comprehensive ISMS repository. My work as COO helped establish a structured and measurable security framework, integrating compliance, asset management, risk quantification, and continuity planning. That is all. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I am the CFO for EcoTrax. The CFO is a chief financial officer, and I mainly deal with financial reporting and any monetary-related activities for the company. I have some background in financial accounting, although not fully, as I'm educated mainly in IT. As a CFO, I was tasked with finding first the laws and regulations affecting my information assets that will be used later for security management. I've found the ISO Corporation Act 2001 as a member of C-suite and several Austrian auditing standards to be helpful in compiling all the related information assets, including the PCI DSS. Moving on, I created the WWND or individual scenarios table, which is later on combined, but in essence, it is what we agreed all to do. And then I compiled alongside my other team members the risk appetite, and we have agreed that it is set at moderate, or any risk above moderate being needed to be treated, and everything below or is moderate to be accepted. The information assets business process that affects me are those related to financial planning, revenue management expenses, and anything related to monetary investment that doesn't directly involve operations. And afterwards, I have compiled the threats and vulnerabilities. These threats and vulnerabilities are individually made, and they are not entirely 100% correct, and the format itself changes after the scenarios to be made later on. These threats and vulnerabilities follow more of a fair-ish model, but they are necessarily assuming the threats as being one, but the scenarios can be many, which is not really correct. Which these three scenarios are then processed or combined together in the following weeks that I've combined with lots of my other team members using the 5 Ws and 1+1H solution. This is also following the FAIR model, which has the ALE, total threats encounters per year, number of assets, the time, the TCAP or the threat capability, and the resistance strength and vulnerability. This is made using a formula, but I've also made it using a Monte Carlo simulation. This Monte Carlo simulation I've coded using Python, which is a certain probability matrix probability function that can be used to calculate probabilities for the vulnerability, but we decided to use the formula in this case. And also with the secondary amount, secondary loss magnitude, and all the assessments I've created also for my scenario specific, which there are around 27. Moving on, the scenarios are then combined, but before that, I've compiled all the consequences that my other team members have made and condensed them into a single consequence table. And we have, due to me being the CFO, we've agreed for the consequence threshold to be around 50,000 or be 1% of 5 million, as that is the agreed upon budget cost revenue, minor to catastrophic range. The scenarios are then combined, and these is meant to a combined risk scenario spreadsheet that is accessible in our drive. This spreadsheet is then turned into a TRA or threat risk assessment, which would cover all threat factors, permission assets, and whether it's cost integrity and accessibility. This confidential integrity and accessibility breaches, including its general treated risk rating for each of the high-level risks. For my own part, I did only my risk scenarios, of course, combined with the others. Moving on is the business impact analysis. We researched this, and I've done my part in determining the cost, time, and or such reputational damages. Then the BCP-DRP analysis, which I have done for my own scenarios again, but this is only for the ones that are above moderate. And finally, the incident response diagram, which is not fully detailed, but we'll cover the high level certain framework parts. This also covers the process diagram, which is the general ISMS implementation and process flow. And I find this quite challenging, but it is a very interesting experience at the very least. That is all for my end as to how I found it. Thank you very much for listening.
Hello everyone, I'm Apsara Basit and I work as the CIO in EcoTrax. So the most important responsibility is to ensure companies' information technology and information by ensuring secure and compliant IT operations that support business goals and innovation. So quickly moving towards my business processes and information assets. The challenging part was not to overlap with my group members' role. So this is my first draft, similarly with the threats and vulnerabilities. Moving forward with the CIO's laws and regulations. So for this, I had to research Australian and international regulations like Privacy Act 1988, etc. Why? Because to ensure that our IT security, meet the legal obligations and industry-based practice. So quickly moving towards the what would management do and consequence table. I had to find out the risk rating labels and appropriate response for the management and also the review frequency. For the consequence table, the challenging part was keeping the quantified value because of the future changing perspective. Now moving towards my finalized risk scenarios, risk descriptions, and I have added my vulnerabilities and threats and the 6Ws. I also added the resulting impacts and controls. Now moving forward to how I calculated the fear model. At first, I had done it qualitatively, but later on, we all as a group agreed to do it quantitatively to make it more meaningful. And I use these reference formulas shown here to, calculate my fear model quantitatively. From this, I got my ALE, annualized loss expectancy, which is needed for our next step, which is, classifying the risk. So we all as a group agreed to this consequence threshold, and according to this one, we classified our risk. I had 11 risks that were above moderate that needed to be treated. So my next step is risk treatment plan. So risk treatment plan, here I have provided clear risk treatment actions and clearly described who the owner is and the required resources and budget, and also KPI for the checking after the implementation. So this is done, and now moving to the information classification. I classified all the information asset by assessing this sensitivity using the CIA tribe, and then then I map the impact level low, high, medium to assign classification level, and then also because it aligns with ISO 27001 and NSW governing guidelines and labeling and handling. So talking about the BIA, so it's the business impact analysis. Like it shows the impact of information assets, what could be the impact on time, resources, cost, political, or reputational. So here I've clearly mentioned everything, like what happens if there's like 1 hour of disruption, 1 day of disruption on cost, time, political, etc. So we also have this impact label, and we have the recovery time objective, which is the maximum amount of time the system can go down, except before everything else fall apart. And we have the recovery point objective. And also I have given the reasoning for RTO and RPO. Moving forward to the business continuity plan. So this is the strategic process for especially my role CIO to what to do if something goes wrong to still continue our business. Here I have clearly mentioned the continuity plan triggers and the immediate actions we need to take. the reviewing period, and similarly the RTO and RPO. Lastly, talking about the TRA, threat and risk assessment, we have risk treatment, risk statement, and also here our controls are linked to the SOA, and we also have the treated risk rating, which is much better than the untreated one. Thank you so much.
Hi, I am Mansi Lotia. I am the CSO of EcoTrax. I protect the information assets. I oversee compliance with security standards and risk management across operations. So the first thing is I researched about the laws and regulations that apply to EcoTrax and my role as the CSO. As EcoTrax is based in Australia, I had to research on the relevant and critical legal frameworks that are important to the companies and to the CSO. So here are a few of the laws and regulations. So now based on this, I researched on the business processes that are compliant with these laws and regulations and are relevant to the CSO. And based on these business processes, I identified the major CSO-owned information assets. Now, then I moved to creating the what would management do table. Here, the management response is purely about the security field. And then based on this, what would management do table, I created the consequence table that consists of the information assets. And then I moved on to assess the risks qualitatively using the who, what, where, how, when, and why aspects. And then to quantify the qualitative risks, I used the formulae to calculate. I also used another approach, which is the Monte Carlo simulation. So this is the Monte Carlo application used. Now, this was all about the individual work. As a group work, we first worked on figuring out the ISMS scopes statement and the SOA mandatory requirements. So because this would act as our checklist and guideline throughout. And later on, we first combined all our business processes and information assets. And after discussing and agreeing, we analyzed and formulated our what would management do table. And based on this, we created our consequence table per field. Like this is the security field, security field, and this is the consequence for security field. And based on the consequence table, we created a threshold table, which I will come on to later. After this, we analyzed our risk appetite and we set it as moderate. So any risks that fall above moderate will be treated and below moderate will be accepted and monitored. Then we moved on to combining all our risk scenarios. So we all first agreed to go with the formula method and drop the Monte Carlo method. So we combined our risk scenarios that we used using the formula method. And we identified which risks need to be treated based on its appetite alignment, which directly links to the threshold table. So based on the threshold table, we understand which risks need to be treated. And after this, we analyzed the risk treatment plan. We created risk treatment plan and we created risk treatment strategies per risk for those that lie above the moderate level. And then we created the information classification table. And then we moved on to creating the business impact analysis table. And then we created the BCP and DRP tables that link to the BIA. So this is the BCP table. And this is the DRP table. And then we moved on to creating the threat risk assessment table that links with the BIA. And then we analyzed and then we used the SOA controls, Annex A controls here in the TRA table. So this is our TRA table. And that's all. Thank you so much for listening.
Hi, my name is Sungyal. I'm acting as a CTO in EcoTrax, our logistics company. I will explain what I have done to achieve ISO 27000 certificate. Individually, we researched laws and regulations related to our logistics company, and then I researched about the business processes and information assets that are related to CTO. After we researched that, we worked on what would management do. This is about how we have defined each risk level and how often we will review these potential risks according to their risk levels. And then I made a consequences table for some risk scenarios. It quantitatively defines which risk categories applies to each information asset. We made risk appetite. It is the level of risk our organization is willing to accept in pursuit of our objective. And then I created risk scenarios for CTO. One information asset can have 3 different risk scenarios. In week 4, we combined all the documentation that I mentioned above into a whole company perspective. But we talked and discussed on how to combine those, and we agreed on doing it as a group. We also made ISMS scope. For example, customer information, operation data is one of our ISMS scope. I also decided to implement FAIR model for my CTO risk assessment. The FAIR model is a standard quantitative framework for analyzing and measuring information risk in financial terms. So this explanation about the FAIR model, you can find it in the FAIR model file. We discussed and reviewed the scenarios and decided to treat the risk above moderate as what our risk appetite defined. I also made risk treatment plan for CTO related scenarios. It is mainly how we treat each risk that is above our risk appetite. And I made a business impact analysis on CTO related risk scenarios. It is a process that identifies critical business functions and predict the potential effects if there is a disruption. And then I created business continuous plan. It is a strategy that outlines procedures for any organization to maintain its business function during a disruptive event. I also wrote recovery plan in case of disaster of CTO related scenarios. Disaster recovery plan is a focused technical plan that detail the step to recover and restore an IT infrastructure failure. For the last, we made threat and risk assessment. It is a systematic process used to identify potential threats to an organization's assets, and we also have control that link to our SOA. Aside of all of that, I contributed in generating and documenting some words documentation about reasoning, evidence, and mandatory documents required by the ISMS. Thank you.